Welcome back to the Catalyst Pharmacy Podcast. Today we're excited to bring you a conversation with Kate Riddell, Assistant Professor of Pharmacy at Butler University and a practicing community pharmacist in Indiana. Kate has a unique role blending academia with hands-on community practice. And in this episode, she shares her journey, her perspective on where pharmacy is headed, and how she's preparing the next generation of pharmacists. Let's dive into the conversation.
My name is Kate Riddell, and I currently have transitioned into a newer role as an assistant professor of pharmacy at Butler University in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's actually my alma mater, so it's pretty cool to be back. And in this role, I get to continue to practice at a local independent pharmacy just north of Indianapolis. It's Cowan Drugs and Parkside Pharmacy. They're two locations in the same town. And I've worked there part-time and in full-time roles over the past few years. And so I get to continue to do that as part of this role, which, especially being in the academic space and working with future pharmacists, I think it's really nice to be able to pull that clinical real life experience into those roles. So professionally, that's what I'm up to now. Thinking back to when I was a student myself, it really resonated with me when I was listening to professors talk about, really threading that needle between what we're learning in the classroom and how it applies to real life practice. I really love that storytelling component and really being able to connect the dots, if you will, on, hey, I know we're sitting here and we're learning all this stuff, but this is how it applies in real life with real patients and how, I use these skills or this knowledge in day to day. And being able to be a representative in the community pharmacy space for that too, since that's definitely something that not every college has, is somebody who's on the faculty, but also practices in the community pharmacy space. I think it's really good representation, especially as community pharmacy is evolving and what that role looks like is continuing to change.
I asked Kate how she describes her professional identity as a professor, a practicing pharmacist, or both.
I say I'm a pharmacist because I think that is the most critical part of my role. And then I go into, depending on how much detail they want, I'll say, I practice in an independent community pharmacy, but I also am on the faculty at my alma mater now, and I get to blend both of those together. But I definitely lead with the practicing pharmacist. It's a lot easier to explain I work in a community pharmacy and stop there depending on the, the level of interest. But we can definitely keep going, and the pharmacy path has evolved so much as far as what you can do with a pharmacy education. And so I think that's really, really neat. And I think, both of our roles are evidence of that, of all the different things that you can do with this education.
I asked Kate about test and treat models and whether she's seen movement towards new categories of medications in pharmacy practice.
I know that one of the things that we're talking about in Indiana, where I live and practice, is we'd really like to get some more test and treat authorization. It's a big need that we're seeing. And I know that there are some states where pharmacists are able to do that, whether it's under a standing order or they've got collaborative practice agreements. But that's one area that we've identified here recently that we'd really like to push for pharmacists to have a little bit more autonomy in, especially as we're gearing into flu season, to be able to help with some of those needs and primary care shortages and just that accessibility. Love if I got diagnosis codes on everything. It's really helpful, especially when looking at some of the doses and directions, depending on what you're using. Some medications that have really different indications for that can be really helpful. And I'd love to be able to have more autonomy and choosing the best, or potentially based on patient preferences or known allergies that sometimes we have on record that their doctor's office doesn't have on record, being able to help with that. But I guess there are a few things that just the accessibility of the community pharmacy space, like the test and treat and a couple other things I could really see there being able to prescribe based on, it's pretty cut and dry if it's a positive test or not, and we can get you started here. I think that there's definitely, everybody's got some different opinions on that. But I think when I think about the accessibility of community pharmacy, especially for things that are kind of that one-off test and treat, that's a space where I'm yes, this is an awesome area that I would love to be able to prescribe based on that test result, especially, something that's not chronic, right? And then something else that I know recently that I've done a lot of work with in Indiana is that we have recently been able to prescribe hormonal contraceptive products. And that's something that has been really awesome for a few patients who have come in and, they can't get into their GP for another 6 months and they need refills, or they're looking to start something new, but doesn't want their parents necessarily to know that they're exploring these options. And so or they just haven't heard back from their provider on refills and they're out, so there's been some instances where our accessibility has been able to really help with that. And I've enjoyed those interactions and having that ability to do those things because we're definitely taught the knowledge. But it does come back to as well, I can see what you're saying. If we're able to prescribe everything, then that would really change what community pharmacy looks like and kind of what the role of pharmacist is.
We shifted into a conversation about prescribing authority, and Kate shared what's happening in Indiana and how pharmacists can provide more accessible care.
Specifically in Indiana, and it looks different in every state, but a patient can only come to you for 12 months worth of oral contraceptives or other contraceptive products that we're able to prescribe before they have to go see a PCP or OBGYN, because that continuation of those routine screenings and other things that are important to check up on that are very out of a pharmacist's scope are still important. And so that's something that we talk about. It's really more of like providing that access for the in-betweens. And so in Indiana specifically, you can come see a pharmacist and get 6 months worth of your preferred contraceptive product that's under our standing order. And then you can come see a pharmacist one more time for a total of 12 months. And then after that, you need to go see like another healthcare provider to ensure that you're, continuing to get those screenings, continue on that preventative care. But it is a really awesome thing that we're able to do, especially for those folks that fall kind of in between, or if you've recently moved and need refills and haven't established yet. And so I'm glad that the data is showing that us being able to provide this accessible service is not causing increased cervical cancer. And we're just showing that access is helping just close some gaps, but not promoting any hindrances. When it was passed, Medicaid in Indiana, so all of our like managed care entities and like our fee-for-service Medicaid will pay for the service. And we're working on that process. So we were actually able to get a grant through our Department of Health that would help with paying pharmacists to provide the service in the meantime so that we can still see patients and get paid for that service as Medicaid is figuring out the enrollment process as pharmacists, as providers, since this is the first service that pharmacists will be reimbursed through Medicaid to provide. And then we bill their pharmacy insurance for the product prescribed. I think one of the things I'm really excited about and also like is kind of giving me some hope for the future of community pharmacy, because I know, we're hearing all sorts of things and about dispensing reimbursement and pharmacies closing. But what I've seen recently is a lot of my patients that have been pushed to mail order. We have a lot of mail order facilities encouraging them to transfer, but they don't want to. Like they want to stay going to a local community pharmacy. They want to continue to come in and say hello to us and update us on their life and ask us their questions. And in some cases, for some patients, that means not even using their insurance so that they can stay with us. And that's something that it's not a clinical service. It's not like a change in community pharmacy per se, but it's something that I am seeing increasingly, or even just folks that are currently get most of their medications at a chain. And they're like, you know what, we want to try something different. Like we have heard great things about, the local independent pharmacy and the family that's been running it, for years. And so we're seeing more people really like verbalizing that they appreciate that. And that's the pharmacy experience they want to have. And so that's been really encouraging to me.
Kate then talked about how community pharmacies can compete with larger chains in mail order, especially when patients value convenience.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not going to say I have all the answers. I will say that our patient population, a lot of them we have an older patient population for sure. But some of our younger patients come to us because their parents come to us and they've stayed in the community. And so I think, though, that one thing that we've gotten a lot of good feedback on is that you call our pharmacy and you get a person, and it's a person you likely know. Whereas with a lot of our surrounding chains, it's an automated system. You can't get through to anybody. You wait on the phone a really long time. You don't always recognize the person that is on the phone. So yes, we might not always be the most convenient option because some of our other pharmacies in the area do have longer hours too. And that is something that sometimes we have like lost patients too. But I do think we've done a really good job of starting to help line up people's medications to all get them kind of at the same time, a med sync process, if you will. We're the only pharmacy in the entire county that will deliver to you. And that is a huge service to so many patients that either have a hard time, getting out and about or require a driver or housebound or, just have a lot of needs, and we'll deliver medications as well as over the counters to you. We do a lot of adherence packaging as well. So we have so many patients in our facilities that we do time of day adherence packaging for them, and we'll, adjust and make those edits as medications are changed and manage all of that for them. So we do offer some of those extra services. We do vaccine clinics in the community. I'll come out to your car and vaccinate you in the car if you can't get out, and that's something that's not always the case everywhere that you go. So I think just building on that personal touch that, you will get to talk to somebody that you recognize when you call here is huge. Now, it's not going to be important to everyone, right? Like, I was having a conversation with some colleagues the other day, and there are some younger folks that have maybe one or two medications where mail order makes sense for them. They don't have a lot of questions for the pharmacist. They don't have any of those additional needs. So maybe just getting it sent to their mailbox every month or 3 months, however much they get at a time, is more convenient for them. And so I might not see them for their medications, but you can't get a vaccine through the mail. So maybe they'll come in and see us for their vaccine needs or their antibiotic needs or something like that. I can't compete with, you can't pick up your groceries at our pharmacy like you can at Kroger or something like that. But we're in a pretty local location. One of our stores actually has a breakfast, lunch, old school diner in it. So a lot of people come in, they'll come eat breakfast and they'll wait on their prescriptions, or they'll be like, hey, can I get a vaccine after this? And so I can process their paperwork in the meantime, things like that. So I think it is that really local touch that some people are looking for. It won't get everybody, but I do think it gives people hope too, to have that more personal experience as well. We have talked about that, the little breakfast place in the pharmacy, it's called The Cupboard, but they fairly recently, I guess a few months ago, they got Triple X root beer. And Triple X root beer, if you're from the central Indiana area or went to Purdue, is a big thing. It's a local diner, super famous. They make their own root beer. And so they started carrying it. And so it's just those little things that are tied to the community and are really local that really bring people in. But I was pumped when they started having Triple X root beer. And I was like, can I really be sitting here having a root beer float while I'm helping people with their medications? It seems a little, counterproductive.
Kate explained some of the new initiatives she's implementing in her pharmacy practice and how her academic role supports that work.
I'm one of our ideas people. I have lots of ideas about how we can, optimize workflows and do things differently. I was the one who was okay, we need to start doing MedSync. And for pharmacy that was not doing MedSync, everybody was really apprehensive. And I understand why. It's a lot of work when you get it up and running. And we're still in that, that process of trying to figure out, okay, what's going to work best for our pharmacy. But I'm really trying to push us into how can we be more efficient on our operations side so that we have more time to explore things clinically. And so, lining folks' medications up so that they're not having to call us as often or coming by as often. And when we have patients who drive 25 to 30 miles to our pharmacy, that's also really convenient for them, for them not to have to make multiple trips. And, we've got patients that are outside of our delivery radius that come to us because there's not a ton of local independent pharmacies in our area, similar to what it sounds like your area is like, Josh. And so how can we explain? And I try to be that person who's okay, this is a lot more work on the front end, but once we get it working, it'll free up so much time for us. Another thing we were working on is perpetual inventory. And so how do we use the recommended ordering system features to optimize our inventory so that, there's more cash flow, but as well as it'll just help with our time and not having to special order as many things that we actually do use pretty frequently. And so I've been working on some of those things. I introduced the hormonal contraceptive service in our pharmacy, and then I'm trying to streamline some of our vaccine clinic scheduling by using some Google Form features to kind of condense where all of those communications go. So not super, super risky right now, but those are some of the things that I get a little bit more time to play around with. It's how can I help on the back end with operationalizing our workflows? Another thing that we started doing is with our students in particular that come through the pharmacy. And we actually do get a fair bit of students, which is really exciting, but we're going to have them start doing some fun marketing videos for our social media, kind of beef up our social media presence, if you will. So I know our student now hasn't filmed it yet, but he's going to do a whole fun reel on this year's flu vaccines and helping create some, advertising marketing materials for us to utilize too as part of his rotation experience. And I think that's a cool thing that we can keep up with too in the pharmacy space, because most pharmacists don't learn very much about business, let alone marketing. But it's even more important, as you mentioned, how do we entice folks to want to come to our pharmacy as opposed to their current pharmacy experience? And some of those personal touches and marketing touches can be huge. So I'm excited to kind of help with that too. And yes, the buy-in part is tough, and it's talking through, and it's like also really listening to what their concerns are about these changes. I think that's really important too. There's some of our pharmacy staff has been working there like almost as long as I've been a person. So, when I come in and I'm like, let's change everything, they're like, hold on, like, what do you want to change? And like really listening to those concerns and like figuring out like, how are we going to address your concerns with this new process? And why do I think this new process will work? Was also a critical part of the buy-in. And I'm glad that you mentioned about how we don't learn a ton about, marketing and business and leadership in school. This kind of ties back to the academic side of things in my role. Is Butler recently, within the past few years, has a course now that pharmacy students take called Entrepreneurship and Leadership. And I get to be the coordinator of it this spring semester. And I'm really, really excited because this is another place where I can bring in, obviously I'm going to bring in some other folks that work in other areas of pharmacy. Like, for example, one of my best friends from pharmacy school that's still in the area, she's a manager of a specialty pharmacy. And so she's had to learn a lot about managing people and different tasks and roles and things like that. But also in my own experience, being able to talk about, like you said, day one, you're the pharmacist in charge. And these are all the things that you have to do and figure out and work with your team. And you're in charge of XYZ. And so we're going to talk about some of those things. And I'll be able to shed some light on my own experience and things that went well and maybe, not so well, and share that with the students, and then bring in some other people who have different experiences so that we can really talk about that, and just address the white elephant of like, you graduate, you get your PharmD, you pass your boards, and now you're in charge. And like, how do you manage all of that? And so I'm really excited that that's been added into the curriculum and that I get to have a role in it.
I asked Kate how pharmacies can better market themselves and connect with patients in today's digital world.
So I also teach health outcomes and pharmacoeconomics, and I taught it for the first time last year. And one of the things that I added in was talking about where people get their health information. And so there was like a statistic about over 50% of patients will like consult the internet before their healthcare provider on like their health questions. And so many of the students, which is interesting to me that this was surprising to them, because when I asked them all if they had Googled something for their health or like their symptoms, to the dreaded WebMD search, like pretty much everyone has done it. And so what we were talking about is we're like, on the flip side too, we have to realize like this is where our patients are getting their information. And so how do we help them find better sources of information, or how do we like prepare for whatever the internet told them? I'm sure most pharmacists at this point have been like, well, I Googled this and this is what it said I had. And then we have to like work backwards, So we talk about that too. I think one of my favorite things going off of that is occurring is I'm seeing a lot of medical professionals stitch some of these videos and then like show their data sources to like disprove them. One of my favorites is in a video that I do show in class is it's technically a Facebook reel since I don't have TikTok, but it is this like homestead influencer who talks about all the bad things that are in like children's medicine. And one of the things she said is like, everyone says you can't give honey to babies, but like honey is natural. Honey's from the earth. So we should give honey to babies. And like, she sounds very convincing. Like it makes sense. All these things that she's naming off, they all sound terrible. And then she's like, why wouldn't we use honey? And so like, if you are unsuspecting, like I could see why you would maybe fall for that. She has a really cute house, nice, the whole thing. Then a pediatrician stitches it and talks about why it's recommended not to give honey to, infants under 12 months. And it has to do with the botulism risks and, the development of their immune system, and like, just, proves to the articles and like shows all the sources and everything. And so he stitched this video so that you could see, how, convincing that could be. But then he's like, this is why we don't do that though. This is why it's the recommendation. And so I really like to show that one. And I've got a few other examples that I like to show as well. But as just a, like, I like that they're going to the source of like where our patients and folks are getting information these days. And they are making sure that they are bringing like the medical expertise side to light as well, so that you can see, why that's the recommendation. So when I asked my students, I'm like, can you think of any other like area where you see a lot of misinformation online? And they had mentioned health and wellness, especially with weightlifting videos. And we talked about that one in particular because one of my biggest like pet peeves in that space is when they're like, do this exercise and you'll shred belly fat. But it's like, you can't target weight loss like that. It's not how it works. Or you'll get toned. Like, what does that mean? You know, things like that. But that is definitely another area where there's a ton of misinformation. And if you are just looking for guidance and you don't, you're just looking for some exercises to try, and like your first thought isn't to consult a professional in that space, you can definitely end up doing some really weird stuff. Like some of those exercises are insane. Like I do not understand why anybody would want to do these like weird compound movements that like it's really easy to mess up your form on. And some of these influencers don't talk about form.
To close, I asked Kate what she's been reading lately and how she balances light reads with more thought-provoking books.
I'm reading a beach read right now. I'm reading The Perfect Day by Ellen Hildenbrand. Netflix recently made it like a short series. So just reading a beach read, but I have another book and I can't remember the name of it right now, but we're doing a retreat that's kind of focused on art here at the university. And so there's a book about how art changes our perception and like our like brain chemistry. And so I have that pinned as like an audiobook to listen to back and forth since I drive about an hour here. I'll get through it pretty quick. Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. So I saved the audiobook. I have Spotify Premium, so I'm planning to start listening to that soon. Well, this author in particular, she's famous for all of her books take place on Nantucket. So it's like a legit beach read. But when I say beach read, it's just a story. It's not too heavy. It's pretty easy to like read through. This one actually has a murder though, so I'm not sure that you can classify it as like the stereotypical beach read. Stereotypical beach read, I guess, is like there's like a romantic plot line most likely. It's nothing crazy and devastating happens that causes tears. Yeah, but this one has a murder, so it might not be quite the beach read. But they all take place on Nantucket, so oh man. I know. I go back and forth. I drive a lot, and so it's either like I've got an audiobook, and most of the time it's like something kind of like I like to read my like lighter books. So my audiobooks are typically, you know, something thought-provoking. But I listen to a business podcast most mornings that goes through the news, which is really helpful. And then I do this app, Marco Polo. Have you heard of it? Yeah. So I'm Marco Polo. And for listeners who don't know what Marco Polo is, you basically like voice record a message and send it to someone, and then they reply when they have time. So Marco Polo is a pretty like creative name in my opinion, but I've got a couple friends that I do Marco Polo messages with because our schedules just don't align to like talk in real time. So I'm always doing something in the car, whether it's audiobook, business podcast, or Marco Polos. Thank you so much for having me.
That's our conversation with Kate Riddell. We're grateful she shared her experience as both a professor and a practicing pharmacist. Be sure to subscribe to the Catalyst Pharmacy podcast for more conversations that inspire and support independent pharmacy. Also, check out Red Cell Media on YouTube to see pharmacy's most important conversations all in one place.